Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Pyrokinesis, also known as Crossfire, a Japanese thriller from 2000 that was directed by Shusuke Kaneko. Now that name should be familiar to you because he directed the Gamera trilogy of the 1990s, the live-action Death Note films from 2006, My Soul is Slashed from 1991, Haunted School 3 from 1997, and God's Left Hand, Devil's Right Hand from 2006, all of which I've reviewed on my channel, either in separate videos or in my Asian horror playlist. He also directed Azumi 2 from 2005, and what I believe to be the single greatest Godzilla film of all time, Giant Monsters All Out Attack from 2001. Quite an impressive resume, if you ask me. So Pyrokinesis is one of those films that flew under everyone's radar when it was originally released on DVD in the United States way back in 2003. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen this, though, because it's made the rounds. But it is a film that I think is worth watching. The plot goes something like this. Junko is a quiet and good-natured young lady who was born with a secret power, pyrokinesis, a deadly form of ESP that enables her to create and manipulate fire that can incinerate anything on command. Her simple, uneventful life is disrupted, however, and she is pushed past her boiling point when a group of teenage delinquents murder a young girl who she recently befriended. Now, in response, she embarks on a plan of vengeance against the killers, but the cops catch wind of this and are hotter on her tail. Pun intended. Now, some of this film's flaws are actually presented right near the beginning of the film, so I may as well address those now. Some of the dialogue and themes are conveyed in a very explanatory manner in this, and are very on the nose to make sure that the viewer gets everything. So, for example, at the funeral near the beginning of the film, of the first victim, there are two dudes whispering, and our lead protagonist, of course, overhears them. And they say something like, I heard the killers were juvenile delinquents. It looks like they will avoid prosecution because they're minors. But how could they get away with something like this? Well, that's just the way the laws in this country work, my friend. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that, where just to make sure the viewer gets what's going on. So the dialogue isn't always like that, but it does happen at times. The plot itself also uses some improbable coincidences, with a few characters who are unknowingly connected by historical events, and that comes out later. I felt like those connections were unnecessary and weakly written. The opening scenes, especially too, which provide a brief backstory of our protagonist's childhood, also feel a little bit rushed, in my opinion. But special effects are a huge mixed bag in this movie. Big time. I think that's a good thing, though. I really do. Some of the CGI fire effects look very fake and even a bit goofy. But on the other hand, there are some convincing explosions, especially the motorbike scene and the amusement park sequence. There's also some legit stunt work in this because at least one, possibly multiple stuntmen were actually set on fire for the purposes of this movie. I mean, there's one scene where I'm like, that's a real dude and he's really on fire. I hope that dude got some decent compensation for that because his entire body was just in flames. Anytime a stuntman goes to that length, I give him props, man. So, it's got good and bad in that regard in terms of special effects. And in my opinion, this uneven mix of good and not so good special effects results in some very entertaining death scenes. Some of which involve fake-looking CGI that's kind of cheesy, and others that are actually pretty cool. That's one of the main reasons to watch the film is all the fire effects. And it's important to note that the fire-based action scenes are very different from what you would see in something like a big-budget Hollywood film, like an X-Men movie. This girl in Pyrokinesis rarely, she doesn't, throw fireballs at people very much. I think it happens maybe once or twice. Much of the time, she simply creates fire in certain deadly ways, which is pretty interesting. And even though this woman can create and control fire, she's always on the verge of, losing control of it, so that in some ways preserves the dangerous aspects of fire and makes the thriller scenes more impactful, I thought. Pyrokinesis has quite a few other things to enjoy in it. I like the storyline and the character motivations, both of which were interesting and definitely worthy of what was going on. The cops are actually rather smart in this movie because they quickly track people down and figure out what's going on, like within short periods of time, so that's good. And as I just mentioned, the thriller elements had some tension and were fun to watch. The two-part finale is probably the best part of the film. There's a nicely magical synth score that pops up at times, especially during the romantic and rather unique snowfall scene, which is pretty cool. And although a few of the technical aspects were lacking due to the budget constraints, I think Kaneko did a very good job in terms of direction and camera work. This director has a real knack for crafting purely entertaining movies. And even if they're flawed, even if they're flawed one way or another, he somehow almost always makes them entertaining. Really like this guy. I really like this director. I like the casting in this film as well. Our lead actress is Akiko Yada, who seems to have a lot of TV work on her resume. Haven't really seen her in a lot of other movies that I've seen. But she has a certain frailty to her demeanor and her persona that makes her vulnerable and likable. This girl is not a badass at all in this movie. She actually makes some mistakes early on that kind of exposes her and makes her task a little bit more difficult. I think it's easy for the viewer to get behind her character here as well. Hideaki Ito has a major role in this. You'll notice him from Lesson of the Evil, since he played the unhinged teacher in that movie. He was also in Woodjob as well. And a very young Masami Nagasawa has a supporting role in this too, so it was interesting seeing her at such a young age. So Pyrokinesis, I think, is a fun movie, man. It's a cool movie. I have it in my collection, and I will definitely rewatch it many times in the future. Unfortunately, the Region 1 DVD seems to be out of print since I purchased it, and it is a bit more difficult to find nowadays. But if you could track this movie down, check it out. I think it's definitely entertaining stuff. And as always, I'll see you next time.